so June 30th, I was retiring as superintendent of Springfield Public Schools. And when I was going to retire, some second graders gave me some very good advice, which they gave me in beautiful little pictures with words below them. Some of the advice was walk every day with a panda. Pretty cool, right? Read books on top of the school bus. And become a ninja, and that was kind of my favorite. Make cookies every day, and then the last one, never ever look at an email ever again, and that was, that was very freeing. So you might say, why would you give up all that good advice to become the Chief Education Officer in the state of Oregon? So I just want, hi Doug, I didn't see you. I just wanted to say that I'm doing this because I see such possibility for the children in Oregon, and for a few really important reasons. First of all, I think we have an extraordinary governor in terms of being an education governor. I mean, he really does put education and healthcare side by side. Those are his two big reform areas. We all know they play really closely together, right? Because if we don't have students who are healthy, it's very hard for them to learn. And then the second reason is getting to work with Rob Saxton over here. So, you know, Rob is a superintendent who got extraordinary results in his school district. We actually worked together in Albany. I was assistant superintendent, Doug was working in the curriculum department, and Rob was an assistant principal at that time. So we have a long history, and I only tell you that because I'm going to explain the difference between the work we each do, because I've been told people have a hard time understanding that, and I agree. It's really hard to distinguish them. But I want you to know Rob and I work extraordinarily well together, and we're both committed to the possibilities for our children and also for overcoming anything we have to in order to make a smooth pathway for all of you who are working directly with children. So I couldn't pass up the opportunity to work with Rob and the governor, so I came out of retirement, and here I am. So let me talk a little bit about the Oregon Education Investment Board and what it does, and then its relationship to ODE and some of the things we're going to do for you. So the Education Investment Board really does four things. The first thing is it develops the seamless pathway of education from P, and that means prenatal, to 20, and that means grade 20 if you choose to go there. And of course, bringing people back on the pathway who might have fallen off either because in K-12 or people coming back to community college, whether it's a new career they're looking for, they've become disabled and they have to do something new. So it really is meant to be from prenatal all the way up to however long someone chooses to engage in education. There was a Senate Bill 909, that created the Oregon Education Investment Board, whose job was to create the P20. The Oregon Education Investment Board, they're my bosses. There's 13 of them. And my job is to develop that pathway, to make sure it's smooth. Now, in addition to developing the pathway, the other part of the job, and this is really more important, is to manage the transition and overcome any barriers we might encounter along the pathway. So I call myself a barrier buster. And that's really like Rob is really working with preschool through grade 12, but I have to look at that whole continuum, and anytime there's a barrier, my ultimate job is to overcome it. So, and I'll tell you about some of those barriers we're working on. So that's the second thing we do. The third thing we do is we make recommendations around strategic investments, and those are either to the governor for his budget or to the legislators. And of course, we can make strategic investment suggestions, but they're the ones who get to determine if it's going to happen. So our job is to be outrageously compelling, so they'll really believe in the investments. The last thing we do is create a budget that budgets to outcomes. And what that really looks like, it really doesn't affect K-12 as much as the other two is 0 to 5. I think you all know about the kindergarten assessment that we're giving this year, and part of the reason for giving the kindergarten assessment is to determine, particularly for the 40% of our children who get to go to preschool because they need extra support, they need kickstart to come to kindergarten ready to learn. It helps us identify which of those early intervention strategies are working most effectively. Is there one group that produces ready for kindergarten more than another group? And when you budget to outcomes, eventually you can say, whoever it is, whether it's Head Start or Relief Nursery, you're really getting kids ready for kindergarten, so you're going to get the resource because you're producing the outcome, which is ready for kindergarten. So that's what we're talking about with outcome-based budgeting. It's easier to understand than higher ed because right now, community colleges and universities, they get their money based on enrollment. If they get more students, they get more money. Well, that's going to shift, that they're going to get their money based on how many bachelor degrees have they produced, how many GEDs at the community college, how many transfer degrees, how many master's degrees, how many doctoral degrees. So the budget is going to be going towards the outcome you want, not towards the input. So that's really the fifth thing that we do, the Oregon Education Investment Board. So let me give you some examples. I know, how many elementary people do we have here? Okay, thank you. In mid-school? In any high school? Okay, so I'll focus mainly on elementary, but certainly give examples from the other two areas. Now, the last thing I want to say is when the governor, and I was his education advisor in 2011, so when all this legislation reform came about, there's another really important piece of the pie that really is the framework. I mean, the framework is 40-40-20 by 2025, 40% in four-year colleges, graduating from 4 years, 40% graduating for 2 years, and 20% career and college ready to take a job right away, ready to go on to college if later they decide to do that. So that's the ultimate goal. But here's the funding strategy behind it. It's a three-pronged funding strategy. The first one is raise the floor. And raise the floor means send more money out to school districts and through schools. So the governor knows the floor is too low. And this year we've been able to raise the floor much more than we've done in about 6 years. What I remind people is we're still not back to where we used to be. So when I hear particularly, I have a lot of reporters going, you must feel really good, we're getting more money for education. And I go, I feel really good that the arrow's going in the right direction. I mean, I'm all for that. But we still do not have the investment we need to meet the needs of all of the kids because we haven't even gotten back to where the floor was before. And we probably even need to get it higher because we are blessed, I believe deeply, to have a lot more needs of kids. You know, we have kids who are surviving who never did before because of medical intervention, premature babies who would have died a long time ago. And a lot of times they bring a lot of special needs with them. You know, we also have kids who are with a rising in autism, on the autism perspective. And like all kids who need certain interventions, they sometimes need unique intervention. And then we are just becoming a state of such wonderful cultures. I think it's one of the greatest exciting things about our state right now. And some of these children bring English not as their first language, and so we also have to meet the needs of those kids along with our gifted kids and on-track kids and kids who need strategic intervention. So in my mind, that floor needs to continue to grow. But in addition to growing the floor, so that's the first piece of the model, the second piece is to make strategic investments. And I would say to all of you as administrators, or coaches, you know that in your districts there was often a focus on something. It might have been early reading. It might have been 9th grade on track. Without some sort of focus, it's very hard to reach the level that we're wanting to reach. So raise the floor, provide strategic funding. And then the last piece is putting some resources towards innovation. So we all know that a lot of the things that are working in school are the result of innovation. So those are things like technology and the advancements in technology. Those are things like response to intervention, and Rob's district truly was a leader in that, and Springfield got trained from people in his district. We all know that there's a lot of different things. PBS is another thing. Playworks, anybody heard of Playworks? Really sensational program to bring PE to the schools, to get the culture, goes really nicely with PBS. So we want to have some resources so we can develop whatever's going to be next in helping us meet the needs of the students. So in terms of meeting the needs of the students, how you measure how your students are doing is really through ODE. And the report card, that measures it. Now there's these things called achievement compacts. Anybody heard about achievement compacts? So I want you to know I have a very different take about achievement compacts, and I'll tell you how we're going to be approaching the use of achievement compacts in the future. So achievement compacts have outcomes for kids like ready for kindergarten, reading at grade level in 3rd grade, 6th grade getting no lower absenteeism, no chronic absenteeism, a math measure in middle school, then 9th grade on track, which means you're gathering the credits you need to graduate in high school, and 9 college credits in the 12th grade. I think we all think that makes sense, right? That those are good indicators about moving students along the pathway. What happened in the past, well, I'm not going to talk about the past, but in the future, what I want to talk about is what we're really seeing, the achievement compacts, is more about the OEIB's accountability, not about your accountability. So we're going to get that data, we're going to aggregate it up, and maybe it's going to show us where we're really having trouble is 9th grade on track. If it shows us that, then we, as the Oregon Education Investment Board, have to talk about what do we do to make sure we help our districts and our schools meet 9th grade on track or 3rd grade reading. So it's going to guide us about how to bring support to you. So what the achievement compacts were was a handshake between the state, particularly the governor, the OEIB, in districts. And so really what we're looking at is how are we doing in providing the kind of support, either raising the floor, strategic interventions to move you along the pathway. That's the main thing we're going to do. Now, you know, last year there was some controversy about goals. Are the goals too high, are the goals just right, or goals too low? I mean, you know, we might look at, if you set really high goals, do you achieve them? If you set medium goals, do people who set medium goals achieve higher than people who set high goals? If you set lower goals, how do you do? We might analyze that. I'm not sure we're really going to get to that. Springfield was a district who set really high goals. That's kind of how we approached it. We didn't reach those goals. Is that better than setting medium goals and reaching it? I don't know, but I don't think that's the main issue that we have going here. So definitely there'll be an opportunity for you to set goals. The third thing is what process is being used in school districts around setting achievement compacts. And I know a lot of people saw this as a bureaucratic thing, maybe just someone from a district office who was filling it out. Let me tell you, the real intention of having teams of teachers and associations working with administrators is so we move towards the idea that teachers and administrators together want to really think about how to move kids along the pathway and make recommendations to the budget. I think traditionally we thought of where teachers really engage is around contract negotiations. They do engage around that, as they should. But on the other hand, we want to just keep encouraging that more of their leadership is really about leadership and instruction. And I'm not meaning to imply that many teachers don't do that all the time, but this was a more formal structure to have school districts working with key leaders and the teaching association and teachers to really think about what do they recommend to their budgets. Now, I know it's been hard to recommend anything to your budgets, right? Because we're just so busy maintaining whatever we had. There really wasn't any play in budgets to say if there's some resource to do some strategic intervention like early reading or making sure kids in 6th grade get to school. There really hasn't been that resource. But since the arrow is going in the right direction and our intention is to keep it going that way, there's now a new opportunity to think about how can you plan together about what are the strategic directions you want to do. So that's what we're looking at with the the achievement compacts. So those are the 4 things the OEIB does. So you go, okay, so what do you do and what does ODE do? So we're the what and the why, and ODE is the how. They are the implementers. So when people start talking to me about the kindergarten assessment and maybe concerns about some of the way it was administered or what the test looks like, I say, well, you really need to talk to ODE about that. I'm more than willing to put you in touch with people because they're the ones who have implemented it. So it's really an easy distinction. Ours is just the what are we going to do and why did we decide to do that? So why did we decide to do the achievement compacts? Because we felt like if we have a P to 20 system and we're always got our eye on targets moving up that system, it allows us to work with legislators. It allows us to work with key policy people so we're not coming up with 1,000 different things, got the arrows going a different way. It just allows us to stay focused on moving kids successfully. So that's the achievement compact. That's the why. That's the why. But the how goes over to ODE. So we made some strategic investments this time. I think you all know about them. One is around early reading, and it's really a lot about working with the communities, with the parents to get them excited, to work with our preschool communities so when they have kids together, they can begin to teach the skills that get kids ready for kindergarten to be able to read in kindergarten. So that's the distinction between the 2 of us. So I think I'm going to stop, and this really goes better if you have questions about what is OEIB doing. So, and I could talk a little bit about the investments. So why don't you talk with your partners for 2 minutes, and then I'll see if there's any questions about my role or input. I'd love input, because next I want to talk about the very important role that you have in this group, because I'm telling you, the governor believes this strategy you're implementing is one of the key strategies. So talk for a minute, see if there's any question, then I'll share my strategies and get your questions. You know how this goes. When my hand goes up, your hand goes up. Let's see that. Okay, and then the talking stops. Great. So let me hold on to any questions you have, because I want to put this last frame out there. So you know this fall, the test scores didn't look as good as some people would have wanted them to. And there was a lot of media about that. Well, from the governor's perspective, how we're all talking is we just got the $75 million of investment. Right now, it's just going out the door. So some of you have seen mentorship money go out. You've seen teacher quality going out to work with teachers, because we know the number one thing is we need a quality teacher in all the classroom. So what we were saying is there's no way we can say whether our strategies are really working, because we just raised the floor and we just sent money out. But we've got one thing we're really looking at, and that's the work that all of you have been doing, because you did this work last year. So what we said is where we have already put resources, and I think these come from federal dollars, but where resources have already been put to schools that need some support, because that's what the governor's whole strategy is about. What we've begun to see as a result of last year is that some of the schools have improved significantly. Others of them have learned from the schools that are model schools, and they have written plans that show that they're implementing some of the strategies, or the strategies that the model schools say are why they were successful. So right now, you are the one thing we point to when we say, yes, it is making a difference, because you're the ones who have already been out of the gate for a year. So we consider ourselves absolute partners in this work. I want to thank all of you who are coaches for stepping up. I know many of you are retired too, probably walking around with pandas every day. And you're back at it. And then I really want to thank the administrators who are administrators of the schools. You know, I know probably when you initially get that word that you're one of the schools that needs support, that's a tough message to, internalize. But on the other hand, it's all about having other partners to help you with the work. I saw the demographics there. Many of you have schools that have kids with lots of unique needs. So, I just look at this as kind of Everyone wrapping their arms around your schools, because what we have to show is that, yes, all kids can learn, not on the same day, not in the same way, and what it takes is just support. And it's support from the governor's office, from Oregon Education Investment Board, from Rob's office, from Education Northwest, and from all of you who are leaders in your building and all of the coaches. So we're counting on you. You are the one place we're looking to say, yes, it does work. If you invest, it makes a difference. So I just really want to thank you for stepping up and doing this work. It's extraordinarily important work, not just because of your schools, and that's a reason enough, but in order to let legislators see an investment in education truly does make a difference. So I really want to thank you for that. So with that, I'm going to take a few questions. There had to be some questions that emerged out of that conversation, or you were talking about what you did last night, but whatever. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for being here this morning. I just wondered, have we considered investing strategically in early childhood so that our students come to us with a foundation?
Yeah.
We're not spending time teaching them to sit and do those things. They come in with a foundation. I just think that that's
Yeah, and they got good thought, and other people were thinking about that. They got a strategic investment. How much extra did early intervention get, Rob?
I don't know, but they also have the Race to the Top grant.
Yeah, yeah. They were given extra money, and they did get a Race to the Top grant too. But yes, in fact, I would say since the governor's been in office, he has moved more money towards early intervention. Both times he's gotten to propose a budget, but I'm maybe hearing from you they even need more, huh?
right. I just came back from New Zealand where I spent 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
They give every family 23 hours of early childhood a week so that their children are getting in there and learning that. That's part of what the government funds. And when those kids start school at age 5, they're reading and they're writing and they know the procedures. So just food for thought.
So did you hear that? 23 hours every family before they go to kindergarten. So they come to kindergarten either with the skills to read or write or reading and writing. And that's definitely part of the strategy when we say we start at prenatal. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can articulate this well, but we work with lots of districts that are trying to implement Common Core as a state standard. And yet a lot of districts don't really have a plan. So it's a little bit cattywampus at this time. And with Smarter Balance coming up, I'm wondering about the work that will be done there, because even and then that connection to OLED and the data points that you're collecting. We're increasing rigor. We're going to probably see scattered results after Smarter Balance happens. The schools are going to be fairly discouraged looking at their data. So I'm wondering what that conversation is about career and college ready with
Yeah.
the impetus of Common Core.
Yeah. See, and that's where my antenna goes up. I go, barrier buster, that's my job, bust those barriers. Because really the support for Common Core will come more from OD, and maybe Rob could talk about that. But the barrier you're talking about is that we have to make sure that when the data comes out, first of all, there is a way to switch it over so that you could say, if it was measured by Oaks, this is really how we've improved. So we do have to be working to do that. And OEIB is a very small staff. There's 8 of us and 3 support staff. But one person we have brought on is a person named Peter Trumba, who is working on the longitudinal database. And he has been a high school principal, a mid-school principal, and technology director in 2 school districts. That's partly what he will be thinking along with people from ODE. But yes, we have to make sure that when that comes out of the gate, it's explained in a way that we can truly understand, have our kids improved or have they not? So the other thing, I think all of you know this, is people confuse Common Core with Smarter Balance. Common Core are standards. Smarter Balance is how you're going to measure it. And so I think we have to help create the distinction between that. And Rob and I were with a community group that, there's some people very concerned about the Common Core right now. And what they don't like is that from the federal level, it's getting coordinated. And I think they don't see how big of a standard this is. It's not what you do in your school. But the other thing I have said that seems to impact people, when you have textbook, you had standards. All textbooks had standards, right? They might call them learning outcomes, or they might call them scope and sequence, but it was the what you were going to teach. And I said, the what in textbooks is determined by California and Texas, right? Am I right about that? They always determine the what. I said the Common Core, at least every state had an equal, say in what works for all of us, just not California and Texas. So that seems to be helping people understand why this Common Core is not a big, bad federal intervention. It's really just a way of articulating the what we need to do along the pathway. So good question, yeah.
So how does the what and the why, the OEIB, what's the connection and how do you connect with ODE to do the how? And I wonder about just the transparency of that, because it's been very confusing to understand the connection and how both agencies are working together.
Right. Well, the way we do the how is that a key team from Rob's office and a key team from our office meets every Thursday. It's a non-negotiable meeting, and we really start talking about, how do we move something. So here's an example. We passed, and I think other boards have, an equity lens, the Oregon Education Investment Board. That's really saying, in Oregon, if we're really thinking of equity, what's the core belief? So the core beliefs are things like having a second language is an asset. It's something that's really terrific. Having various cultures and understanding those cultures and making them part of a wonderful school community is an asset. So there are things like that. Having teachers who reflect the cultures of our children is critical. So those are kind of core beliefs. So then Rob's group, they're the ones who put out the call for proposals around mentorship or quality teaching. We'll all sit around that table, and then Will might say something like, remember, we've got to make sure whatever is in this proposal, it helps us meet the goals around the equity piece. So, we just meet really closely together. Honestly, for people out in schools, ODE is more who you would turn to because they're doing the implementation and they're supporting you in implementation. When you really want to be talking to the OEIB is when you're wanting to talk about what you think a key strategic investment would be that would help move kids along the pathway. Or if you had concerns about budgeting to outcomes. If in the K-12 arena, we don't do that because everyone's entitled to a free public education. So you could say, well, like in preschool, if schools aren't meeting the targets, you could just say, close that school. Well, we're not approaching it that way in K-12 for multiple reasons. The first one is geographically, we know there are schools that are hundreds of miles from other schools. The way we're approaching the K-12 is this, using this strategy, which is we're providing support to the 15% of the schools that most need support. Now these come through, you're all Title I schools here, right? What we are talking about a strategic intervention because people are saying, well, what about the 15% of the schools that aren't Title I schools, but aren't performing as well as their comparator schools? Well, that's like a really good question, and I think that is something we'll suggest as a strategic intervention. So mostly you're going to deal with ODE unless you want to talk about how to invest money, unless you want to talk about a strategy you think's really making a difference. Then you would come talk to OEIB. We're much more at the policy level, dealing with the legislators as opposed to dealing with the buildings. Other than I am a barrier buster. So if you've got barriers, I need to know about that. That might be the way I'm most important and the people I work with for you. And I'll give you some core examples. Right now at community colleges, if they give transfer degrees, which are very important, we have a lot of kids who could not go to college if they weren't getting transfer degrees at community college. Those kind of count against them because it's not a degree, it's a transfer thing. It goes over to U of O and they get their degree from U of O or PSU. They don't get it from community college. That's a barrier for community colleges to really want to use transfer degrees, so we've got to change that. Right now, it's very hard for high school teachers to do college now and teach a course and be able to give community college credit. You need a precise certificate. So you might be an AP teacher and all of your kids pass the AP exam or the International Baccalaureate exam. And if you don't have a precise license that says you've got a master's in physics, you can't teach that course even though you're showing tremendous result. Barrier buster. We got to bust that barrier, right? Yeah. We know in elementary schools, if kids come to school without food, without medical care, with teeth that are killing them, there's no way they're going to be able to read by third grade level. And that's why we're creating these hubs, these hubs in different communities. But we also have to keep saying that's why we're going to budget to outcomes for preschools, because we want schools that really produce the outcomes we need. And then we also know that a lot of kids go home after school, even first graders, to no parents. They're just on their own. Or if they're going to daycare, it's not great daycare. That's a barrier, and we got to bust it, because it's not allowing kids to come to you ready for kindergarten. So that's really one of my main jobs, is to be the barrier buster. I just run around. I'm going to wear a cape, I think, that says BB.
One more question?
Yeah.
Nancy, does OAIB have the authority or capacity to redefine good intended legislation? For example, the strategic investment of $100,000 for a full-time teacher. That might work well in metro areas, but in rural areas, we need more flexibility. So can you help us with that?
Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of thing we could really work on. So we need to know about those barriers, and then we can work on that. I mean, we don't get the final authority. We need to work with our legislators, but as we talk about investments, that would probably be the Ways and Means Committee. That's why we really need to know about all the sort of barriers like that. Of course, we're going to have to prioritize them too. You know what I mean? There's going to be many more barriers than our ability to get resource for. So, but what we need first is a complete list of them, and then say which ones can we work on, which ones can other committees work on. So for example, we got a lot of feedback that the OEIB, which has only been up and going about a year and a half, but about the report card, that it wasn't understandable to parents, you know, that the last report card. So that we hand over to Rob's office, because they're the ones who are implementing, and they've come up with a new report card, which is usually a lot better. And early on, what we heard is nobody understands what the OEIB is. When you communicate in a language people can't understand. So I drove my little car up to Nike and asked them to give me a position to the Innovation Fund, to have someone who's coaching me and putting out materials in a way parents can understand it. And they did. They gave us just a terrific person to work with, and those materials will be coming out soon. They're so that parents, it's not so important they know what OEIB is, but what it's going to do for their children. What does it mean to have a P20 pathway, and what does it mean? What can you expect for the state of Oregon to deliver? So, you know, Doug, you're making me think we definitely need to do a survey or something asking about what are all the barriers, and doing a prioritizing process and working with legislators. So I'll put that on my barrier buster list. Any other questions? Any other big barrier you can tell me about? Yeah.
Are you working on two things? Anything to do with attendance and families, and how to help schools with that?
We haven't worked on that, but that's one that I really hear. And of course, there's that sixth grade having kids there. So, and there's some extraordinary models around. We just, this was actually Springfield School District. I had nothing to do with it, but I happened to be there when it was happening. And what they did is they actually got one of their judges. So every time a child was absent, the families had to go in front of a judge. And the judge, instead of saying, I'm going to fine you for, you know, whatever the law says or used to say, they say you need to engage in parent education classes. And that made a big difference, because when our truancy officers went to see parents, what they found is three things. One is these kids were out of control and parents didn't know how to get them under control. It's not that they didn't want to have their kids go to school. They didn't have the management skills to really get their kids to do that. Two, a complete sense of disorganization in the home to the point they wouldn't really know how to help the child organize around homework or getting it there. And of course, the third one is a lot harder one to work on, and that's a drug and alcohol problem that was really obvious as they went to the home. Sarah, where's Sarah? Sarah, you kind of led, your group led that. Wasn't there a huge reduction in terms of how many kids? Huge reduction. So that's the other thing I forgot to say. The model schools like you, we're doing the same thing when we're making strategic investments or we're trying to find out about what are the models that really work and how do we start replicating that, or saying to people, do you think you can create a model? Because it's not just giving money, it's got to be giving it in something we know is effective and changing it. So that's another really important one. I appreciate that. Yeah. There was a hand up. Did you have your hand up? Oh, you were pointing to her. Thank you for helping. That's great.
I had two questions. The second part was, are you doing something to change the graduation look? I think especially alternative schools, it really punishes us on the rating system, and the 5-year markers, it seems like we need some adjustments.
So yeah, I think that's something we didn't we adjust that? Okay, Rob will answer that one in terms of working on it on the state board. But the other thing I can say about that is I think where OEIB will be putting energy is just the kind of thinking around what are the other ways we can get kids to graduate. So we know for certain kids it's online learning. We know for certain kids they're like academies of arts and academics or math and science. We know for other kids they're alternative school placements. But the problem why alternative school placements, but it's got to be a placement that gets kids to graduation. So we have to know what are the good models out there around that, because unfortunately this is a bad thing with testing. Remember, and I don't think anyone intentionally does this, but when there became high-stakes testing, some people just moved some kids out of the regular high school so they didn't have to count in terms of their graduation rate, and yet there wasn't an investment about what was the school like for them. So now we're seeing schools that are having much deeper relationships with their community colleges. So you get a student who's a junior or a sophomore, 1 credit. Pretty hard to say, yeah, I want to stay for 4 years and everyone else graduates at 18 and I'm going to be 22. But when you say, let's make time the variable, let's move those kids up to the community college. So you leave at 18 and go to the community college, but up there you're still getting your high school certificate and it's counting for college credit. People are using that all over and they're getting outrageous results. So it's not only just fixing the problem, it's also coming up with the models, which will be the theme all along. Any last, yeah? Yeah, so the hubs that are coming to communities, they're really all about mental health support for physical health, mental health, and also connections with schools. That's the whole reason for the hubs, and there's a huge investment being put there. So, and the CCOs, the Coordinated Care Organizations, which is asking the medical community to start thinking very differently, and mental health is definitely one area they need to think very differently about. We're hoping that happens through the hubs. Yeah.
Just want to put a little plug in for the differences between rural schools. And I know Doug addressed the flexibility and money, but the resources, just trying to get your people to the resources and having more support for rural areas where they can come together and have PLCs, be able to access resources with a large number of staff, where when they do access resources, often it's with 1 or 2 people, and developing that model, because I feel like we're kind of on our own to figure out how to get the rural schools access to some of those things. So I feel like we need more support for how to do that.
So I'll tell you, there's I'm passionate about a lot of things, but two things that are really, becoming major passions for me are the rural communities. And because what I think is we create something, we pass legislation, and most of the people doing that are gathered around the more urban areas. Then we think it's just going to work for the rural areas. And I know it is, and I'm hearing from a lot of rural communities about that. I'm going to go on a tour of Eastern Oregon a week from now, because I need to get in rural communities, because I'm like from New York, so I gotta, I gotta get to know the reality. I have to tell you that it's not the environment I came from, but I truly believe that's one of the most important issues. And the second issue, and this is probably the thing I'm most passionate about, because I think it also helps the rural, is we have no technology plan for this state, and no really comprehensive technology plan for the state. I'm going to be, right? And that gives so much opportunity, and I'm going to be perfectly clear. 16 of 17 community colleges got money for infrastructures. Why can't we get money to make sure we have the technology our kids have? So if they're in 6th grade and they read on a 4th grade level, they can on an iPad reduce the textbook to 4th grade level so they can be in the conversation. Why can't we do it so when we need a PLC, people aren't traveling 200 miles from here to there? I really think the lack of a comprehensive strategic technology plan is really a detriment to us. And again, it's something that possibly you could get bonding for, which you can't do with a lot of other things. So I think it's really, does people, raise your hand if you agree with me. I don't want to be on my own little, okay, good. That's the sense I'm getting from people. So I will, at the next OEIB meeting, which is October 8th, be articulating that and about my commitment about really figuring out what works in rural, not just assuming what works in urban, works in rural. Now what I'll say is ODE has tried their best around technology, but maybe had a half a position, Rob, working on that. It's going to take more, and here's the other opportunity around technology. I don't know if you all know this, but we're becoming known as the startup state for educational technology software companies. Well, we have Intel, and we've got a bunch of other technology companies. I think if you bring them to the table, they're really going to play in terms of solution and lending some resource and advocacy with legislators too. So I just think this is the right opportunity to really do something in a comprehensive way around technology. So that's why, as the leader of the OEIB, that's what I'm going to be advocating for. I'm going to stop. I'm probably over my time. Am I over my time?
No, you're good.
Okay. Well, I wish I could stay. I got to go give a speech in Oregon City, and my panda's waiting for me in the car too. So I can't walk them, but I can drive around with them. So thank you very much.